What happens when one of the world's most controversial royals sits down with late-night television's most ruthless interrogator? You won't believe what unfolds when Prince Harry's carefully crafted public image collides head-on with Stephen Colbert's relentless pursuit of ratings. Last night's episode delivered the kind of explosive television that networks dream about and publicists have nightmares over. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two heavyweight personalities clash in what can only be described as one of the most uncomfortable interviews in late-night history. The stage was set for disaster from the moment Prince Harry walked onto the Late Show set. Sources backstage reported that tensions were already running high after Colbert's production team had allegedly promised a softball interview to Harry's representatives, only to deliver something entirely different. The Duke of Sussex, clearly expecting the typical celebrity puff-piece treatment he'd grown accustomed to on American television, was visibly caught off guard when Colbert opened with what seemed like friendly banter, but quickly revealed itself to be a carefully laid trap. "Your Royal Highness," Colbert began with his trademark smirk, "or should I say former Royal Highness? I'm never quite sure with you these days." The audience laughed, but Harry's smile faltered for just a moment, a crack in the armor that Colbert was quick to exploit. "I mean, you've got more titles than a used car lot, but somehow less credibility with your own family." Harry maintained his composure, forcing a laugh that anyone with half a brain could see was completely manufactured. "Well, Stephen, I think credibility is earned through actions, not inherited through bloodlines." It was a diplomatic response, but Colbert wasn't interested in diplomacy tonight. "Speaking of actions," Colbert continued, leaning forward with the predatory intensity that had made him famous, "let's talk about your latest venture. Another tell-all project. Another opportunity to air your family's dirty laundry for American dollars. How does it feel to be the most profitable victim in modern history?" The question hit like a sledgehammer. Harry's media-trained smile completely disappeared, replaced by a look of genuine shock and growing anger. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" His voice carried a dangerous edge that anyone familiar with royal protocol would recognize as a warning sign. But Colbert was just getting started. "Oh, come on, Harry. We're all friends here. You've made a career out of being the wounded prince, haven't you? First it was your mother's death. Tragic, absolutely tragic. But you've managed to monetize that grief pretty effectively. Then it was the mean British press. Then it was your racist family. Then it was your wife's struggles. There's always another sob story, another villain. Another reason why poor Harry deserves our sympathy and our money." The audience, initially laughing along with what they thought was typical Colbert snark, began to sense that something was seriously wrong. The energy in the room shifted as Harry's jaw tightened, and his hands gripped the arms of his chair. This wasn't playful late-night banter anymore. This was character assassination disguised as comedy. "You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about," Harry said, his voice low and controlled but vibrating with barely contained fury. "My mother died when I was 12 years old. That's not a career move. That's trauma that I've spent decades trying to heal from." Colbert, apparently intoxicated by the scent of blood in the water, pressed harder. "But Harry, let's be honest here. Your mother's been dead for over 25 years, and you're still using her death to sell books, documentaries, and interviews. At what point does grief become a brand? At what point does tragedy become a business model?" The question was so cruel, so calculated in its viciousness, that even Colbert's typically partisan audience fell into stunned silence. Harry's face went through a series of expressions: shock, hurt, and then something much more dangerous. The carefully constructed media persona was cracking, revealing something raw and furious underneath. "You want to talk about business models?" Harry's voice was rising now, his British accent becoming more pronounced as his anger grew. "Let's talk about your business model, Stephen. Making jokes about other people's pain, turning human suffering into punchlines, building your career on cheap shots and gotcha moments. Tell me, how much money have you made mocking people who can't fight back? Colbert's eyes lit up with the kind of malicious glee that had made him famous and infamous in equal measure. He'd found Harry's breaking point, and he was going to exploit it for every rating point it was worth. Oh, so now you're the victim again? Poor Prince Harry, sitting in his Montecito mansion, crying into his Netflix money because a comedian asked him tough questions. Do you ever take responsibility for anything, or is it always someone else's fault? The confrontation was spiraling out of control, and everyone in the studio could feel it. Camera operators were getting tighter shots, sensing that they were witnessing television history in the making. The audience sat in uncomfortable silence, no longer sure whether they should laugh or look away. Harry stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the deadly quiet studio. Responsibility. You want to talk about responsibility? I served 2 tours in Afghanistan while you were here making jokes about war. I've spent years working with veterans, with mental health charities, trying to make a difference. What have you done besides mock people from behind this desk? The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Colbert, for perhaps the first time in his career, seemed momentarily speechless. But the silence didn't last long, and when he found his voice again, it was clear that he was about to cross a line that would change everything. "Oh, please," Colbert said, his voice dripping with contempt as he recovered his composure. "The war. Hero angle? Really? Let me tell you something about your military service, Harry. You played video games in a helicopter while real soldiers did the actual fighting. You were a tourist with a uniform, a publicity stunt with bodyguards. The only thing you ever killed was your own credibility." The studio erupted in gasps. Several audience members could be heard muttering in shock, while others began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Even Colbert's most loyal fans seemed stunned by the viciousness of the attack. This had gone far, beyond typical late-night ribbing into something genuinely ugly and personal. Harry's face went white, then red, then white again. His hands were visibly shaking with rage as he processed what had just been said about his military service, something he had always held sacred. The one part of his life he had never commercialized or exploited for personal gain. When he spoke, his voice was barely controlled fury. "You coward," he said, the words cutting through the studio like a blade. "You absolute coward. I flew combat missions. I lost friends. I came home with scars you'll never understand because you've never risked anything more dangerous than a paper cut from your cue cards. You sit here in your safe little bubble, making jokes about real sacrifice, while people better than you die for a country you only pretend to respect." The confrontation had reached a boiling point that no one in the studio was prepared for. Colbert's producers were frantically trying to signal from the wings, but their host was completely consumed by the battle he had started. His ego wouldn't let him back down, even as the situation spiraled completely out of control. Sacrifice? Colbert laughed, but it was a harsh, ugly sound devoid of any real humor. The only thing you've sacrificed is your family's reputation. You've turned your grandmother's final years into a circus. You've humiliated your father, and you've dragged your brother through the mud for Netflix money. But please, tell us more about sacrifice while you count the millions you've made from betraying everyone who ever loved you. That did it. Something in Harry snapped completely. He stepped closer to Colbert's desk, his whole body radiating barely contained violence. The security team backstage began moving closer to the stage, sensing that this was about to escalate. "Beyond words. You mention my family one more time," Harry said, his voice now deadly quiet. "And I will end this conversation in a way you won't like. My grandmother died knowing that I loved her. Can you say the same about anyone in your life? Or are you too busy being a professional bully to maintain actual human relationships?" The personal nature of Harry's counterattack hit Colbert like a physical blow. For a moment his mask of smug superiority slipped, revealing something raw and defensive underneath. But instead of pulling back, he doubled down with the kind of reckless cruelty that had become his trademark. "Your grandmother died disappointed in you," Colbert spat, abandoning any pretense of comedy. "She watched you abandon your duty, abandons your country, abandon everything she spent her life building. The Queen died knowing that one of her grandsons was a selfish, entitled brat, who put his own feelings above the monarchy she dedicated her life to preserving. That's her real legacy, watching you destroy everything she worked for." The audience was no longer just uncomfortable. They were horrified. Several people could be seen getting up to leave, unable to stomach what they were witnessing. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was a public execution disguised as an interview. Camera operators continued filming, but even they seemed shaken by the unprecedented viciousness of the exchange. Harry's response was swift and devastating. "You know what, Stephen? You're right about one thing. I did disappoint her. I disappointed her by not leaving sooner. I disappointed her by trying to serve an institution that was slowly killing my wife and destroying my children's future. But at least I had the courage to make hard choices. What's your excuse for being a coward who hides behind jokes because you're too weak to face real conversations about real issues?" The attack landed perfectly, exposing the fundamental cowardice that lurked beneath Colbert's aggressive persona. The host's face contorted with rage as he realized that Harry had turned the tables, using Colbert's own tactics against him with surgical precision. "Weak!" Colbert's voice was rising now, his carefully crafted television persona completely abandoned. "I've built a career calling out hypocrites and liars. I've exposed corruption, challenged power, and held people accountable. What have you done besides whine about how hard it is to be rich and famous? You're a professionally pampered man-child who thinks the world owes him something because his mommy died." The mention of his mother again sent Harry over the edge completely. He slammed his hand down on Colbert's desk with a sound that echoed through the studio like a gunshot. Pens and papers scattered as the desk shook from the impact. "Don't you dare!" Harry roared, his composure finally and completely shattered. "Don't you ever mention my mother again. You're a parasite who feeds on other people's pain because you don't have the talent or the courage to create anything meaningful yourself. You're a failed comedian who found success by being cruel, and now you're so addicted to the cruelty that you can't stop even when you're destroying yourself." The studio had gone completely silent except for the sound of Harry's heavy breathing and the mechanical whir of the cameras that continued to capture every moment of this unprecedented meltdown. Colbert, perhaps finally realizing that he had pushed too far, seemed to be searching for a way to regain control of a situation that had spiraled completely beyond his ability to manage. But Harry wasn't finished. The dam had burst, and years of frustration with hostile media, invasive interviews, and personal attacks were pouring out in a torrent of barely contained rage that threatened to consume everything in its path. "You want to know what real weakness looks like, Stephen?" Harry's voice carried a dangerous calm that was somehow more terrifying than his earlier shouting. "Real weakness is a middle-aged man who makes his living by attacking people who can't fight back. Real weakness is someone so desperate for relevance that he'll say anything, hurt anyone, cross any line just to get a reaction. You're not a comedian. You're not a journalist. You're a professional bully who found a way to monetize cruelty." The words hit Colbert like physical blows. His face was flushed red, his hands gripping his desk so tightly his knuckles had gone white. The careful composure he had built his career on was crumbling in real time, and everyone in the studio could see it happening. "At least I'm honest about what I am," Colbert shot back, his voice cracking with the strain of maintaining his aggressive facade. "I don't pretend to be some noble victim while cashing checks for betraying my own family. I don't hide behind charity work while stabbing the people who raised me in the back. You're a fraud, Harry. A professionally wounded fraud who's made millions by selling his family's secrets to the highest bidder." Harry stepped even closer to the desk, his presence now genuinely intimidating. The security team was positioned at the edges of the stage, ready to intervene if this escalated to physical violence. The tension in the room was so thick, it was almost suffocating. Fraud? Harry's laugh was bitter and completely without humor. You want to talk about fraud? Let's talk about this show, this persona you've created. You hide behind this character, this fake version of yourself, because the real Stephen Colbert is too small, too pathetic, too fundamentally broken to face the world honestly. At least when I speak, it's my real voice. When you speak, it's just another performance by a man who's too cowardly to show his true face. The personal attack struck deep. Colbert's entire career had been built on characters and personas, hiding his real self behind layers of irony and performance. Harry had found the one vulnerability that could actually wound him, and he was twisting the knife with surgical precision. You think you know me? Colbert's voice was now shaking with genuine rage. You think you understand what it takes to build something real in this business? I've earned my place here. I've fought for every opportunity, every laugh, every moment of relevance. You were born into everything you have. You've never had to earn anything, never had to prove yourself, never had to work for respect. You're a tourist in your own life. The hypocrisy of the statement wasn't lost on Harry, and his response was swift and devastating. Earned your place? You earned your place by being cruel. You earned your place by making other people's pain into entertainment. You built your career on the backs of people who trusted you enough to sit in that chair, and you repaid their trust by humiliating them for ratings. That's not earning anything. That's being a parasite. Something in Colbert finally snapped completely. Years of built-up resentment, professional frustration, and personal insecurity came pouring out in one final desperate attack. You know what your real problem is, Harry? You're just like your father, weak, entitled, and completely unable to handle the responsibilities that come with your position. The only difference is that he at least had the decency to stay and try to make things work. You ran away like a coward the moment things got difficult. The comparison to his father was the final straw. Harry's face went completely white. Then, red with a fury that seemed to radiate from his entire being. When he spoke, his voice was barely human, more growl than words. My father? Harry's voice was deadly quiet now. My father spent his entire life waiting for his mother to die so he could finally be king. He chose that crown over his own son's happiness, over his own son's mental health, over his own son's wife's safety. And you know what the really sick part is? You're just like him. You'll sacrifice anything and anyone for your own ambition. The only difference is your crown is made of cheap television ratings instead of gold. The comparison between Colbert and King Charles was so unexpected, so perfectly crafted to wound, that it left the host completely speechless. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. For the first time, in the entire confrontation, Stephen Colbert had been rendered completely, utterly speechless. Harry seized the moment, his voice rising to fill the deadly silence. You want to know what real strength looks like? Real strength is walking away from people who are destroying you. Real strength is choosing your family over your career. Real strength is saying no to a system that's designed to break you down and grind you up for other people's entertainment. He began moving toward the edge of the stage, his body language making it clear that he was done with this conversation, done with this show, and done with Stephen Colbert entirely. Real strength, Harry continued, his voice now carrying across the entire studio, is recognizing when you're in the presence of someone who has absolutely nothing to offer the world except cruelty, and choosing not to participate in their sickness anymore. Colbert finally found his voice, but it came out as a desperate, almost pleading whisper. You can't just walk away. We're live. You can't just leave. Harry stopped at the edge of the stage and turned back to face his tormentor one final time. His expression was no longer angry. It was something much worse. It was pity. "Watch me," he said simply, and with that, Prince Harry walked off. The late show stage, leaving Stephen Colbert sitting alone at his desk, surrounded by the wreckage of what had once been his reputation. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether to applaud, boo, or simply flee. Camera operators continued filming, capturing every moment of Colbert's complete humiliation. As Harry disappeared into the wings, the studio remained frozen in a moment of absolute television history. The confrontation was over, but its consequences would reverberate through the entertainment industry for years to come. Stephen Colbert had finally met someone who refused to be bullied, refused to be broken, and refused to play by the rules of a game designed to destroy human dignity for profit. The show cut to commercial, but the damage was done. In trying to destroy Prince Harry, Stephen Colbert had succeeded only in exposing the hollowness of his own character and the cruelty that lurked at the heart of his professional success. The hunter had become the hunted, and everyone watching knew they had witnessed something that would change late-night television forever.